when I get up on the mic, I'm a monstrosity.
What's up, my Wizards Dev SBMTG channel down there with the decks and stuff today. I got something that a lot of you are actually pretty excited about. I asked you at the end of my last video, I'm doing Jund. Do you want to just see Jund mid-range, you know, good stuff? Or do you want to see the Gitrog monster? Like, almost everyone in the comments is like, show us the stupid frog. I've been really heavily mentally invested, let's say, in this deck over the last week here and thinking about all the ways you can play the frog. And rather than just give you, you know, one, this is definitely how we play the deck and nothing else, I'm going to go through all the drops, 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop, and so on, and tell you all the different things that I think would work well in Jund Frog, and then I'm going to give you sort of what I ended up with at the end of the process, at the end of the video. That makes a lot of sense. But I do want to just sort of give you the 3 basic ways I think the card can be played in these colors first, before we get into the individual cards. The first way you could build the deck is just to make a sort of aggro deck and put the Gitrog monster at the very tip top of the curve. It does work pretty well, you know. You play value creatures on turns 2, 3, and 4, and then you play the Gitrog monster turn 5 and just ride it, you know. He can win the game a couple of turns after he comes out anyway. He's got a really good power to weight ratio, 5 mana for a 6/6 death touch. Pretty good on its own, you know. And he provides you with a sort of hand refill and lets you get rid of lands that you don't really care about anymore. You don't need all 5 of that mana anymore. Just start sacking lands during your upkeep and essentially drawing 2 cards, which for aggro decks is really good because you can still have just 3 or 4 lands out and be totally fine in aggro. So it does work that way. The second way you can play the frog in Jund is by making Jund ramp, which I do like the idea of, because not only will you ramp into the frog on turn 4 often, but you'll also have a lot more lands to feed him, and you can go a little bit higher up on the curve and play other things that are synergistic with him, but I'll get into that in a second. The third way you could make the deck is just to make a mid-range deck that plays, you know, lots of removal and controls the game in the early game, then drops Frog in the mid-game and rides it from there, you know, lots of value post-Frog by drawing cards, you know, and then we can just control the game and win off of our huge 6/6 Death Toucher. So that could also work too. That's sort of a Jund mid-range, you know, good stuff deck right there. The path I've chosen we'll get to at the end of the video, but first I want to go through all the different drops from 1 on way up here and go through, well, you know, the cards that we could play. First thing I want to talk about playing in the 1-drop slot is Magmatic Insight. This is one of those cards you're probably not going to play on turn 1, but you could if you wanted to. This is a better card after we've dropped the monster. It reads basically, you know, pay 1, draw 3 cards. Pretty awesome. Draw 3, discard 1, you know. If you did play it, I'd only play maybe 1 or 2 copies at the most. You don't want to overload on these. I don't think it's worth playing 4, but at least, you know, obvious thing to point out. A 1-drop creature that we could consider playing is obviously Groundskeeper. A lot of people want to play him in the deck, but again, I don't know that I'd go a 4 of. This is another thing that we don't want to play on turn 1. We want to play it after we've already played our frog and start getting lands back from the graveyard. So I would only play like 1 or 2 of these in the deck, because you got to understand, after we drop our monster, we're drawing a fair amount of cards. So, you know, pretty easy to draw into a Groundskeeper after that. And if we don't draw into the Groundskeeper, who cares? It's just a good option to have in the deck. He's good to draw into after you play your monster, a little bit more value, but he's not by any means necessary. Here's a good card for 1 mana. You could play Sinister Concoction in the deck. Makes a little bit of sense because pre-Frog, it's good removal, allowing you to get to your frog in the first place. And post-Frog, you could always discard a land and draw a card, or the card that you put into your graveyard off the top of your library could be a land, draw a card, and, you know, kill a guy. That's always good. I really, really like Sinister Concoction in this format, by the way. If you haven't noticed, I've talked about it in a few videos in the last couple of weeks. Really think that it's a pretty solid card and would work pretty well in this deck. And if we have Delirium pieces, this could fuel Delirium pretty well as an enchantment to let you discard a thing and put another card in the graveyard. But the major draw here is that we could kill a guy and draw up to 2 cards. That's good. We can play Traverse the Uvenwald in the deck, and I actually like this as an option. Early game, it doesn't ramp us, but it does ensure that we get the land that we need to get to that 5th land drop and play our monster. If we have Delirium, we can go get any old land in the entire deck. That's pretty good. Or we can go get a creature. You know, let's say we have Delirium online, but we don't have our monster yet. This allows us to search it up. It also obviously feeds the monster, so that's good too. You know, going in and getting a land is good because we want to feed the monster as much as possible. And all this for only 1 mana. The card has multiple functions, and I'm going to end up playing it. And the last card I want to talk about as far as 1-drops go, and it'll segue into the 2-drops too, is Dragon Master Outcast. You know, both Dragon Master Outcast, and I'll go ahead and start the 2-drops here, just so you know, Sylvan Advocate are pretty important cards. You know, especially Sylvan Advocate is just an important card in the format, but I think those are important cards to consider when building Monster. After having dabbled around with the deck, I don't necessarily want an effect that makes me have 6 lands on the battlefield when I have a monster out. Sometimes it can be hard. Now, there are definitely ways that we can, you know, the cards that we can play that allow us to get a bunch of lands on the battlefield. That said, I don't necessarily want the pressure of absolutely having to have, you know, 6 lands on the battlefield every single turn in order for these to be even remotely playable past a certain point. A pair of 2-drops that you could consider playing are Gather the Pack and Seek the Wilds. Seek the Wilds helps you get the land, whereas Gather the Pack doesn't. Meanwhile, Gather the Pack puts the cards into the graveyard, where Seek the Wilds puts the cards on the bottom of your library. I think Gather is probably the better card here, because post-monster, you can search up another creature and dump a bunch of lands in the graveyard and draw a bunch of cards off Gather the Pack. That seems good. You don't have the option to drop lands in the graveyard with Seek. So that's an issue, but with Seek you do get the land to feed the monster if you want to. I think Gather is also a good card before you get the monster to help you get the monster if you don't have him out. And any other things that you need. You know, we're playing a fair amount of creatures in the deck. So post monster, you could be looking for a bigger creature. You could be looking for a Mina and Den. You know, it's entirely possible. So Gather the Pack looks pretty good, but there ends up being a fight between it and Traverse the Uvenwald. You know, at the end of the day, I think Traverse probably wins that fight. You could play Sylvan Scrying in the deck, which again doesn't ramp us. It sucks that we don't have a reliable ramp piece at 2 mana that gets us a land. We have a creature that does it. I'll talk about that. We have a couple, but one that I want to highlight. But we don't have a good one that gets a land. We could play Ruin in their Wake, but then we'd have to reliably have Waste on turn 2, and it's just not going to happen. So, you know, Sylvan Scrying would be good because we're playing a lot of very specialized lands in the deck, but I don't know that I want to play Scrying. I think I want to play something that actually ramps us on turn 2. So I ended up playing 4 copies entirely, and I'll get to the deck here in a second, but I did play all 4 copies of Deathcap Cultivator. Deathcap Cultivator sucks in that it's not a land, but it's great in that it's just generally ramp. This can lead us to Mina and Den on turn 3, or a Gitrog monster on turn 4, which can just win the game, honestly. And finally, in the 2-drop slot, we could just play Removal. You know, we could play Grasp of Darkness or Ultimate Price. Those both seem like pretty good, you know, removal pieces. We could also play Roast, but I'd rather play one of the black removal pieces than Roast, you know. The deck that I built is producing something like 16 black sources, which is plenty to get 2 black on turn 2. Ultimate Price is still a good card and is more, you know, splashable than Grasp, obviously. Is instant speed, that's awesome. So is Grasp, by the way. But, you know, depending on what style of deck you're building, I think it's important to play a 2-mana removal piece because we really don't want to get blown out in the early game. Into the 3-drops here, first thing I want to talk about is Kozilek's Return. You know, instant speed, blowout removal. It really pays to have a form of mass removal in the deck. Kozilek's Return allows us to play a couple of things a little bit higher up on the curve than Gitrog Monster and get a lot of value out of it. And by the way, if we can cast this after we play a huge Eldrazi, by the way, then Gitrog Monster will survive it, which has actually been kind of important. Of course, we could play the old standby Nissa's Pilgrimage in the deck. Pilgrimage is fine. You know, I tested around with it. I didn't ultimately end up playing it. But if you're just going to go pure ramp, this would be the 3-drop, you know, land ramp that you play. Not only because it puts land on the battlefield, but it puts one in your hand. Even post Gitrog Monster, this is a really good card. So if you're going pure ramp, this is definitely your 3-drop. Sin Prodder. A lot of people wonder about Sin Prodder. Basically, if you've got a monster out, this makes their decision very hard because normally the easiest decision with Sin Prodder for them to make is when you get a land during your upkeep, because they're always like, no, you can't have the land, I don't take any life and you don't get your land, haha. But you gotta get your monster out, they make you discard the land, or they make you put the land in your graveyard, then you get to draw a card. So that makes their decision kind of tough, because if they give you the land, then you get to feed it to the monster next turn. That's awesome. If they don't give you the land, you get to draw a card. That's awesome. Sin Prodder has been a really good card, and one of the whole reasons that I've built the deck in the way that I've built the deck. Sin Prodder, fantastic, especially once you have that monster out. Pulse of Mirasa. Let's talk about that for a second. It's kind of a weird inclusion, but I actually think it might be worth a 1 or even 2 of. You can either return a creature that you've lost, maybe you've accidentally lost something good to a Sinister Concoction. If you're playing that, you mill something off the top and God, it's something awesome. This can help you get that back. Also, lands that you sacrifice to your Gitrog monster, obviously, can help you get those back. So, just Pulse of Marassa is actually a pretty decent card, at least to consider in the 3-drop slot. I want to talk about Nissa Vastwood Seer. 7 is tough to get to, but in my deck I'm playing 1 copy of Eldrazi that costs 7. So 7 isn't impossible in any way, You got Gitrog monster, you got Mina and Den, you could play, there's a land ramp card that you could play in the 4-drop slot. We'll talk about that in a second. You could play Nissa's Pilgrimage, we could play Deathcap Cultivator. So just, it seems like once you get your monster out, you're gonna have a hard time getting past 5 mana. But not necessarily if you build the deck correctly, and it can be pretty easy to get to 7. Nissa is also, you play her and you go get a land to feed to the monster. That's good. When you do flip her, then she allows you to just put lands on the battlefield. That's good. Or just draw cards, whatever. She's also another win condition, getting you big things, So Nissa, I think, is maybe worth at least a 1 of, if not a 2 of. You can also play Kolaghan's Command, obviously. I mean, you can't talk about a deck with black and red in it without talking about Kolaghan's Command. There's a mode on this card in this deck that reads, if you've got a discard Gitrog monster out, discard a land, draw a card. So it adds a mode to the card. That's one thing. Takes out small guys, make them discard, whatever. Just a pretty utility card. And if you've lost a monster or you've lost, Mina and Den, something like that, you can get it back. That's good. So, there could be multiple reasons to play the card. And in sort of an aggro deck, then I could see playing a copy or 2 of this. But ultimately, I didn't go with it. What are the 4-drops here? And Jund, I think you definitely want to play Mina and Den if you're going the land ramp route. Just a really good 4-drop, obviously. With second turn ramp like Deathcap Cultivator, you can play this on turn 3 and then drop, another land. That's pretty good. Turn 4, you Gitrog monster and you've got like an extra mana. That's pretty good. So, anytime, by the way, anytime that you can play a Gitrog monster earlier than turn 5, on turn 4, and have a mana left over, there are a couple ways of doing it, then that is fan-freaking-tastic. You have set yourself up for success. You can also give that same Gitrog monster Trample, which is awesome, by the way. 6/6 Trample is great. I mean, that's a really, really good body. When you do have a Mina and Den and a Gitrog monster out at the same time, these abilities do stack. You can play up to 3 lands on your turn, because the way it's worded, you can play an additional land on each of your turns. That means that you can play up to 3 lands on your turn, and that sometimes is incredibly relevant and is great ramp at times too, because again, don't be shocked when I give you the land count, we're playing a bunch of lands. It's worth it to point out Mind Rack Demon, I think, 4 mana 4/5 flyer that post frog can get you a bunch of value. You can dump a couple of lands in the graveyard and get 2 cards off your 4/5 flyers. Seems pretty good. I didn't ultimately play it because I really am a little skittish, and I'm fairly confident in our ability to activate Delirium, but I'm a little skittish about what happens with this card if we don't activate Delirium. So I'm not sure. Although you could make the argument that if you play this and then follow it up with a frog, you're probably going to win the game anyway. You could obviously play Languish. I've already brought this up, There were a lot of times in testing where all I was really trying to do at first was play a Gitrog monster and then draw into a Languish, wipe the board, and win off the back of monster. Does happen with Languish quite a bit. But it also happened a lot with Kozilek's Return, and ultimately I ended up playing Languish on the board and just 2 main board copies of Kozilek's Return. In a pretty much must-play card, as far as I'm concerned, the way I build the deck, is Explosive Vegetation. Even post-frog, great card. You get 2 lands straight onto the battlefield that you can then feed to your frog. And anytime that you can net more than 1 land a turn while you have a frog out is great. This allows you to do that. You play a land, go Explosive Vegetation for 2 more lands, even though you had to sacrifice a land. In that situation, you just net 2 lands on your turn. Anytime you can net extra land and you have a monster out, you, my friend, are doing the right thing. Turn 5, we're into that, and we obviously have to play Gitrog monster. We have to make room for this card, or else the deck doesn't exist. I've said a lot about the monster in this video already, obviously, but I do want to point this out while he's here. This guy dodges a lot of important removal in the format. He dodges Ultimate Price because he's multicolored. He dodges Grasp of Darkness because he's got 6 toughness. He dodges Silk Wrap because he's, 5 casting cost, and just those 3 are very important cards to dodge in the format. Another card that we could consider playing at the 5-drop slot is Obnixilis, I would say, you know. Once his ultimate emblem is out, it's just crazy, you know. We're drawing a bunch of cards off Gitrog Monster, we draw cards off him, we just end the game very quickly, but honestly it takes a while to get to his ultimate. I'm not sure that it's worth the 1 Obnixilis, but if we were playing him, that would be all I'd play. There are a few 6-drops that I would consider playing here, and they're all at least fairly important, although I think one might be a trap, but we'll talk about that. A good one is Chandra Flamecaller. I think this is pretty good, you know. We can fairly reliably get to 6, but I don't want, again, with like a card like Sylvan Advocate, I don't want to be at 6 the entire game and like have to stay there. But we can reliably get to 6 or 7 to cast a card if we have to, if that's what we're focused on. So, you know, Chandra is a pretty good 6-mana card, obviously. Her 0 ability is especially good, you know, if we're holding a couple of lands in our hand, we can discard our hand, draw some cards because we just dumped some lands in the graveyard, and then draw that many cards, +1. So we can just draw a ton of cards off of her 0 ability. And obviously Chandra can also just win the game by herself. She's also a board wipe that Gitrog Monster will survive, so that's important too. You could play Chandra. I didn't ultimately end up playing her, but she is really, really on the cusp. Like, I think that she is probably worthy of play in the deck, but ultimately I didn't do it. But obviously I wouldn't be mad at you if you did. The card that I think might be a trap, but I'm not sure, I haven't tried this yet, but I'm interested, is the Ulvenwald Hydra. You can play this pretty reliably the turn after you play your frog, you know, just sacrifice a land the turn after you play your frog, then play 2 lands, drop this. That's how you get to 6 pretty easily, by the way. But Ulvenwald Hydra, here's the thing. You go get any land that you want. That's pretty good. You can feed the frog, you can go get one of our super awesome special lands. All of that seems good, but I'm just not sure that this stays big all game long. You know, again, I just don't need this to reliably be big. I want it to always be big. I don't want to have to manipulate it to be huge at all times. I just don't know if it's worth it, and I haven't tried it yet, because I think there are better 6-drops. The 6-drop that I ended up playing is Oblivion Sower. I think Oblivion Sower is awesome in this deck, and obviously the lands that you sacrifice don't go to your graveyard, so you won't get the draw off them. Super bummer. But if you want to ramp up, you know, to 7 or 8 mana in this deck, Oblivion Sower is a really, really good tool to be able to do that. Big creature, that's good. We have to have those just to finish the game out. Great blocker, that can sometimes be relevant. Mostly big creature though. And most importantly, gets us a bunch of lands that we can use to feed to the monster. That's awesome. There are some 7-drop cards that I want to talk about, but I think I would only make room in the deck for 1 7-drop card. So choose very wisely which one you'd go with. You could do Dragon Lord Atarka, dropping a Gitrog Monster, and then a couple of turns later, or even the next turn, you know, there are ways of doing it. Following it up with an Atarka seems pretty good. You know, you just blow away a couple of creatures and make room for your Gitrog Monster and your Atarka to swing in the next turn. That seems like it would finish out the game pretty quickly. But the 2 that I'm most interested in are Omnath, Locus of Rage. That seems awesome. You know, with Mina and Din and Gitrog Monster, we're playing a bunch of lands. We got Groundskeeper in the deck. You know, we can reliably generate a huge guy every single turn. That seems good. And the other one is World Breaker, which I really, really like in this deck, actually. And World Breaker allows us to play Kozilek's Return much more effectively. I can't really tell you how awesome it is to play an early, you know, Kozilek's Return, then Gitrog Monster, then a little bit later follow that up with a World Breaker, which then wipes the board for, you know, 5 damage apiece off Kozilek's Return, and our Gitrog Monster and our World Breaker stick around. That's just the most ridiculous play ever, and like it wins us the game every time it happens. Every time it's happened to me, wins the game pretty much immediately. And obviously when you sacrifice lands to get the World Breaker back, that feeds the monster, you know, you draw a card off of that. So just these cards work so well together that I'm going to make room for at least 1 World Breaker. I think I should probably show you the deck the way I've built it. Here's the list right here. And I'll tell you, first of all, we're building sort of a combination of decks 2 and 3 from like way back at the beginning of the video. Yeah? Remember that? A little bit of ramp, a little bit of control-y mid-rangey elements. We're playing some removal in the deck, but at the same time, we're playing Explosive Vegetation, Deathcap Cultivator, you know, ways of getting a little bit more mana than just the 5 mana needed to cast Gitrog Monster. Again, the best play available to this deck, at least, is to play Kozilek's Return early and then play Gitrog Monster. After that, when you play your World Breaker, Kozilek's Return will deal 5 to everything on the battlefield. You'll keep your Gitrog Monster and your World Breaker, and you'll start wrecking face. And here's the land base. Don't freak out, we're playing 29 lands because we need to. Not only do we want to get to that World Breaker and that Oblivion Sower after we play the monster and we have to start sacrificing lands, but we also have to sacrifice a bunch of lands. Not only that, but if we have Mina and Din and Gitrog monster out, we want to make it to where we can play all of the lands. You know, we get to play 3 lands a turn. I want to actually do it. There are also on-board effects like Mina and Din and, you know, World Breaker's activated ability when he's in the graveyard that we have to pay for, so the deck is very mana hungry. And of course, again, you sack lands every turn, so you need all the lands that you can possibly get. And 29 is about right. I tried 32. I've even flirted with 28. I think this is a good happy medium here. We don't have to play all the lands, but we really don't want to play too few lands either. And here are the power rankings for the deck that I've scrabbled together here. A final score of 66, not too bad, that's pretty competitive. And the best news is the final cost. Even though we're obviously playing a ton of really powerful cards in the deck, the final cost is only about 135 to 185 US legal tender. That's pretty good compared to a lot of the decks that we've seen in the previous standard. Like Jace is still lurking around here. You could buy this deck for about half a play set of Jaces. For 2 Jaces, you could have this deck. That's pretty good, right? Let me know how you felt about this one down there in the comments section. I'm really interested in how you to build the deck. I just gave you a bunch of different cards that we could play. Which of the 3 styles that I've sort of mentioned here would you have gone with? Or if there's a completely different style of deck that you'd like to build with Jund Frog, let me know. There's probably other ways to build it I haven't really considered. It's entirely possible. What are we doing next time? That's important to me and most of you. We could either do Mono White Angels, which will play like Archangel of Ties and Archangel Avacyn. You know, the thing looks fairly swole up to me. Or we could do budget. We could do a budget blue-white spirits deck, and I pretty much got that one all the way ready. Same thing with Angels. It's almost ready to kick out the door. But blue-white spirits I've been working on for, you know, about a week now, about as long as I've been working on this. So let me know what you want to see next, and I'll get that right out the door for you. If you enjoyed the content, what you should do is just hit that thumbs up button. If you enjoyed the cat, you should also do that. I know some of you come just for the cat. I don't begrudge you for that. It's views. You could share the video. I mean, that's cool. Nobody does that. You could do that. Or you just subscribe. You know, if you haven't subscribed yet, now so you should just do that. I'm Dev from mtg. This is Ziggy, as always, the real star of the show. And I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Oh, where are you going?